The massive doors of the Galactic Military Academy slid open with a deep rumble that shook the ground beneath every recruit's feet. Hyunwoo felt his heart pound as he stepped through the entrance alongside hundreds of other beings from across the galaxy. Some walked on 4 legs, others floated in the air, and a few crawled with tentacles that left wet trails on the polished floor. The human group stayed close together as they moved through the corridors. There were only 12 humans in total among the 300 recruits. Jinae walked beside Hyunwoo, her police training keeping her alert to every detail around them. Donghyun moved with the quiet confidence of a soldier, while Sumin took notes on a small device, studying the alien architecture with curious eyes. "Look at the size of this place," Jinae whispered, craning her neck to see the ceiling that disappeared into shadows above them. The academy was built for beings much larger than humans. Every doorway could fit 3 humans standing on each other's shoulders. The stairs were designed for creatures with legs twice as long as human legs. Even the air felt different here, thick with the scent of ozone and something metallic that made their noses tingle. They entered the main training hall, a space so vast it could have held a dozen football stadiums. The floor was made of some dark material that seemed to absorb light. Strange symbols glowed along the walls, pulsing in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Other recruits filled the space in organized groups. The Catherian delegation stood in perfect formation, their blue skin shimmering under the artificial lights. Each one was twice the height of a human, with 4 arms and eyes that glowed like stars. Near them, a group of rock-like beings called Granite Lords communicated through sounds like grinding stones. Their bodies looked like living mountains, complete with crystals growing from their shoulders. But it was the trainer who dominated the room. Trainer Vextar stood at the center of the hall, like a living nightmare. He belonged to the Dracani species, one of the most feared warrior races in the galaxy. His body was covered in scales that looked like black metal armor. Each scale was the size of a human hand and gleamed with an oily sheen. His head was reptilian but intelligent, with yellow eyes that missed nothing. When he moved, muscles rippled beneath his scaled hide like steel cables under tension. He was 3 meters tall and built like a war machine. His arms were longer than a human was tall, ending in hands with claws that could punch through starship hulls. His tail, thick as a tree trunk, swept back and forth behind him as he surveyed the new recruits. "Welcome to hell," Vextar's voice boomed across the hall. The sound was like rocks falling down a mountain. "I am Trainer Vextar. For the next 6 months, your lives belong to me. Some of you will graduate. Most of you will not. Some of you will die. That is acceptable." He began to pace in front of the assembled recruits. Each step made the floor vibrate. "You come from 17 different worlds, 17 different species. But here you are all equally worthless until you prove otherwise." His yellow eyes swept over the crowd and stopped on the human group. A smile spread across his reptilian features, showing teeth like black daggers. "Ah yes, the humans. I have heard about your species. Small, weak, fragile. Your bones break like dried wood. Your skin tears like wet paper. You have no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities." Hyunwoo felt his face burn with embarrassment and anger. Around him, other species were making sounds that might have been laughter. The Catherians clicked their mandibles in what was definitely amusement. "In fact," Vextar continued, "I wonder why the Academy even accepted humans. Perhaps it was a clerical error." More laughter from the crowd. "Let me demonstrate why humans remain unranked in galactic military assessment." The trainer's gaze fixed on Hyunwoo. "You humans, step forward." Hyunwoo's mouth went dry. Jinae grabbed his arm. "Don't do it," she whispered urgently. But human pride was a dangerous thing. Hyunwoo had grown up hearing stories of human heroes who never backed down from a challenge. He had watched movies where the underdog always found a way to win. He stepped forward. "What is your name, small one?" "Hyunwoo, sir." "Hyunwoo." Vexitar pronounced it carefully as if tasting something unpleasant. "Tell me, Hyunwoo, what makes humans think they can serve alongside true warriors?" The question was a trap, and Hyunwoo walked right into it. "We might not be the strongest or the fastest, sir. But humans never give up. We adapt. We survive." Interesting theory. Vexitar took a step closer. Now Hyunwoo could smell the trainer's breath like hot metal and sulfur. "Shall we test it?" What happened next took less than a second. Vextar's hand moved in a casual backhand motion like someone swatting a fly. The blow caught Hyunwoo across the face with the sound of breaking bone. The impact lifted the human off his feet and sent him flying backward through the air. He crashed into a group of Granite Lord recruits, his blood spattering across their rocky skin. Pain exploded through his skull. His nose was definitely broken, probably in several places. Blood streamed down his face and onto his uniform. The hall fell completely silent except for the sound of Hyunwoo's ragged breathing. Medical drones appeared from hidden panels in the walls, their mechanical limbs already extending scanners and healing devices. This, Vextar announced to the crowd, is why humans remain at the bottom of every military assessment. Weak bones, fragile bodies, limited endurance. They break at the first real contact with a superior species. The medical drones reached Hyunwoo and began scanning his injuries. One of them projected a holographic display showing the damage to his skull and face. The drone's mechanical voice spoke in perfect galactic standard. Multiple fractures detected. Nasal cavity severely damaged. Recommend immediate medical evacuation and reconstructive surgery. But Hyunwoo was already moving. Ignoring the pain that felt like fire in his skull, he pushed the medical drones away and struggled to his feet. Blood continued to pour from his broken nose, but he wiped it on his sleeve and took a shaky step forward. "Where are you going, human?" Vextar asked. There was something new in his voice. Not quite interest, but perhaps the beginning of curiosity. "Back to formation." "Sir?" Hyunwoo's voice was thick with blood and pain, but it carried across the silent hall. "You should accept medical treatment. Your injuries are severe." "I can stand, sir. I can continue." Hyunwoo took another step forward, then another. His vision was blurry and his balance was off, but he made it back to his place in the human formation. Jinhye steadied him with one hand while Donghyun moved to block him from view of the other recruits. Vextar watched this display with those unreadable yellow eyes. For a long moment, trainer and student looked at each other across the vast hall. Finally, the Dracani spoke. "Interesting." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Then Vextar turned away and began addressing the other recruits as if nothing had happened. But Hyunwoo caught something in those yellow eyes as the trainer turned away. Not respect, not yet, but perhaps the first tiny seed of it. As orientation continued around him, Hyunwoo stood bleeding in formation and wondered what he had gotten himself into. The pain in his face was nothing compared to the burning determination that was building in his chest. He would show them. He would show them all what humans could do. 2 weeks had passed since Hyunwoo's broken nose, and the training had become a daily nightmare. Every morning at dawn, the recruits were dragged from their beds by automated systems that showed no mercy for any species. The humans learned quickly that their smaller bodies needed less sleep than most aliens, but they also needed more food to fuel their higher metabolisms. The academy cafeteria was a place of wonder and horror. Food dispensers served meals designed for dozens of different alien digestive systems. What looked like delicious fruit to a human might be poison, while things that looked like rotting meat could be perfectly safe. The humans had to learn by trial and error, often spending entire nights sick from eating the wrong nutrients. "This tastes like battery acid," Jinhye said, poking at a purple blob on her tray. Around them, Granite Lords were happily crunching on what looked like broken glass while making satisfied rumbling sounds. "At least it's not moving," Sumin replied, eyeing a dish where small worm-like creatures were still wiggling. "I think those are supposed to be a delicacy." The real torture began in the training halls. Vextar seemed to have made it his personal mission to break every human in the academy. His training methods were designed for species with natural armor, enhanced strength, or built-in weapons. For humans, every exercise was a test of survival. Gravity training was the worst. The academy's gravity chambers could simulate conditions from any known world. While other species trained at their home world's gravity, humans were forced to endure conditions that should have crushed them flat. "Today we train at 3 times galactic standard gravity," Vextar announced, his scaled face showing what might have been amusement. "Most species can handle this for 30 minutes. Let us see how long the humans last." The gravity field activated with a deep humming sound. Immediately, Hyunwoo felt like an invisible giant was sitting on his chest. His knees buckled and he had to fight just to stay standing. Around him, other humans were struggling just as badly. Jinhye dropped to one knee, gasping for air. Donghyun managed to stay upright, but his face was turning red from the strain. The Catherian recruits moved through the heavy gravity like it was nothing. Their forearms gave them better balance, and their denser bone structure was built for high-gravity worlds. They performed combat drills while the humans could barely walk. Pathetic. Vextar's voice boomed over the sound of struggling recruits. On a real battlefield, the enemy will not adjust gravity for your convenience. But humans were stubborn creatures. When Jin'ei collapsed completely, unable to stand, Hyunwoo crawled over to her. Fighting against the crushing force, he managed to get his arms under her shoulders and help her sit upright. Donghyun, seeing this, forced himself to move to Sumin's side when she started to fall. They spent 2 hours in that gravity field. By the end, every human was covered in sweat and could barely move. But they had all survived. More importantly, they had helped each other survive. Combat training was even worse. The weapons designed for alien hands were too large, too heavy, or completely the wrong shape for human anatomy. A rifle meant for Catherian hands had 4 trigger mechanisms. Swords designed for granite lords were so heavy that humans could barely lift them. Adapt or die, Vextar said simply when the humans complained about the equipment. In real combat, you will use whatever weapons you can find. So they adapted. Sumin discovered that smaller weapons could be modified with spare parts from the Academy's workshops. She spent her free time creating grips that fit human hands and balance systems that worked with human reflexes. Jin'ei learned to use her smaller size as an advantage, getting inside the reach of larger opponents where their weapons were less effective. The most dangerous training was live combat exercises. Recruits were paired against each other using non-lethal but extremely painful energy weapons. Being hit felt like being struck by lightning, and the weapons left burns that took days to heal. Hyunwoo found himself paired against a granite lord named Thekmor. The alien stood twice as tall as the human and was built like a walking mountain. His skin was literally made of living rock and energy weapons barely scratched him. "This will be quick," Thekmor rumbled in his stone-grinding voice. He raised his massive weapon and fired a bolt of energy that should have ended the fight immediately. But Hyunwoo was no longer the same person who had volunteered on the first day. Weeks of brutal training had taught him to read his opponents, to think faster than his body could move. He dropped and rolled to the side, the energy bolt passing over his head by inches. The granite lord was strong but slow. Humans were weak but fast. Hyunwoo used his speed and flexibility to stay out of range while looking for an opening. When Thekmor overextended himself reaching for a shot, Hyunwoo darted in close and fired 3 quick shots at the joints in the alien's rocky armor. The granite lord crashed to the ground with a sound like an avalanche. The training hall fell silent as everyone stared at the human standing over his defeated opponent. "Acceptable," was all Vextar said, but his yellow eyes lingered on Hyunwoo longer than usual. The other species began to notice the humans differently after that. What had started as pity or amusement changed into something closer to wariness. The humans were getting stronger, faster, smarter. More importantly, they were working together in ways that other species rarely managed. When Jin'ei was injured during a climbing exercise, the other 3 humans immediately stopped their own training to help her. When Donghyun's equipment malfunctioned during a survival test, Sumin shared her supplies without being asked. When Hyunwoo was overwhelmed during a tactical simulation, all 4 humans pooled their knowledge to find a solution. Vextar watched these interactions with growing interest. Draconi were solitary hunters. Most species in the Academy competed against each other even within their own groups. But these humans seemed to get stronger when they worked together, not weaker. Late at night, when the other recruits were sleeping, the humans would gather in their shared quarters to compare notes and plan strategies. They analyzed Vextar's training methods, looking for patterns and weaknesses they could exploit. They shared techniques they had discovered and helped each other overcome individual limitations. "He's testing us," Sumin said one night as they huddled around a small light in their room. "Every exercise is designed to expose what he thinks are human weaknesses." "So we prove him wrong," Jin'ei replied, flexing her hands where new calluses were forming. "We show him that human weaknesses can become human strengths." By the end of the 2nd month, something had changed in the training halls. The humans no longer looked out of place among the alien recruits. They moved with confidence, fought with skill, and solved problems with creativity that surprised even their instructors. But Vextar was far from finished with them. If anything, his training methods were becoming more brutal as the humans proved they could survive what should have broken them. The real test was yet to come. The 3rd month at the Academy brought changes that no one had expected. The human quarters, once filled with groans of pain and exhaustion, now buzzed with quiet activity late into the night. Hyunwoo sat cross-legged on his narrow bed, studying footage of the day's combat training on a borrowed viewing device. "Look here," he said to the others, pointing at the screen. "See how Vextar shifts his weight before he strikes? He always favors his right side when he's about to use his claws." Janae leaned closer to examine the footage. Her face bore new scars from training accidents, but her eyes were sharper than they had ever been. "You're right. And watch his tail. It stops moving right before he attacks." These late-night study sessions had become ritual. While other species slept off their injuries or socialized in their own groups, the humans analyzed every detail of their training. They had no choice. Their bodies were smaller and more fragile than their alien classmates, so their minds had to be faster and more flexible. The next morning brought another surprise. During combat practice, Hyunwoo faced Vextar himself in a demonstration match. The trainer moved to deliver one of his devastating backhand strikes, the same move that had shattered the human's nose on the first day. But this time was different. Hyunwoo saw the weight shift, noticed the tail going still, recognized the micro-expression that crossed the alien's reptilian features. He dropped low and rolled forward, passing under the trainer's arm instead of trying to block or dodge backward. Vextar's strike hit empty air. For just a moment, the massive Draconi was off balance. Hyunwoo could have struck at the trainer's exposed side, but academy rules forbade students from actually attacking instructors. Instead, he simply stepped back and resumed his defensive stance. The training hall was completely silent. No student had ever successfully avoided one of Vextar's demonstration attacks. The trainer's yellow eyes fixed on Hyunwoo with an expression that was impossible to read. "Interesting," Vextar said finally. It was becoming his favorite word when dealing with humans. The other humans were evolving in their own ways. Janae had discovered that her background in police work gave her advantages that pure military training could not match. She could read body language across species barriers, spotting deception and aggression in ways that impressed even the Academy's intelligence instructors. During a tactical exercise, she correctly identified 3 Catherian recruits who were planning to break the rules and attack human students during what was supposed to be a non-combat mission. Her early warning allowed the humans to prepare, turning a planned ambush into a carefully orchestrated counter-trap. "How did you know?" Donghyun asked after they had successfully avoided the trap and completed their mission objectives. "Same tells us human criminals," Janae replied with a grin. "Nervous energy, avoiding eye contact, clustering together when they should be spread out. Aggressive species aren't that different from aggressive individuals." Donghyun was developing his own specialty. His military background had taught him to make weapons from whatever materials were available. In the Academy's workshops, surrounded by alien technology he barely understood, he became a master of improvisation. When the standard energy rifles proved too unwieldy for human hands, he modified them using spare parts and creative engineering. When the Academy's combat knives were designed for claws instead of fingers, he forged new handles from salvaged materials. Soon other species were quietly asking to examine his modifications. "This is clever work," admitted Zekthul, a Catherian whose species was known for their technological expertise. "We had not considered this approach to grip dynamics." Sumin's evolution was perhaps the most dramatic. Her analytical mind, freed from the constraints of human-only thinking, began to see patterns that escaped even veteran instructors. She could predict training scenarios with uncanny accuracy, often preparing her team for challenges. Before they were officially announced, "Tomorrow will be the underwater combat exercise," she announced one evening, as they gathered for their nightly planning session. "How do you know?" Hyunwoo asked. "Vextar hasn't said anything about water training. The maintenance crews have been checking the seals on Training Hall 7 for 3 days, Sumin explained. "That hall has the only pool system capable of full submersion combat. Plus, we haven't had aquatic training yet, and it's listed as required in the Academy handbook." She was right, of course. The next morning, recruits found themselves suited up in breathing apparatus and diving into a pool filled with obstacles, opponents, and enough artificial current to simulate fighting in a raging river. Most species struggled with underwater combat. Their natural movements were clumsy and inefficient in the dense medium. But humans had been swimming for millions of years. In the water, their smaller size became an advantage, allowing them to move through spaces that larger aliens could not navigate. The training exercise became a showcase for human adaptability. While granite lords sank like stones and Catherians flailed with their multiple arms, the human team moved through the water like they belonged there. They completed their objectives while other teams were still figuring out how to move effectively underwater. Vextar observed from the pool deck, making notes on an electronic tablet. His expression was unreadable, but he spent more time watching the humans than any other group. The changes in the human students did not go unnoticed by their classmates. What had started as pity or amusement was gradually transforming into something more complex. Other species began studying human techniques, trying to understand how such physically inferior beings were not only surviving, but excelling. Some reactions were positive. A group of peaceful herbivore species called the Gentle Ones began approaching the humans for advice on defensive tactics. Their own species had never developed warrior traditions, and they were struggling with the Academy's combat requirements. "Your methods interest us," said their spokesman, a graceful creature whose name translated roughly to soft wind through grass. "You fight without hatred, defend without aggression. This aligns with our philosophy." But not all attention was welcome. A group of Catherian students led by a particularly arrogant individual named Vorthak had grown resentful of human success. Catherians considered themselves the most advanced species in the galaxy, superior to all others in technology, strategy, and natural ability. The idea that primitive humans could outperform them was intolerable. The confrontation came during a night training exercise. Students were supposed to navigate a complex obstacle course in complete darkness. Using only their natural senses and basic equipment, it was designed to simulate moving through enemy territory without being detected. Vorthak and his followers had planned to sabotage the human team by triggering false alarms that would bring instructors and flood the course with light, ruining the humans' careful progress. What they had not planned for was human adaptation and foresight. Sumin had predicted the possibility of sabotage based on increasing tensions in the barracks. The human team had prepared accordingly, setting their own counter traps and monitoring systems. When the Catherians moved to spring their ambush, they found themselves caught in a web of detection devices and misdirection tactics. The confrontation that followed was brief, but decisive. In the darkness, human advantages in stealth and improvised combat proved superior to Catherian technology and natural weapons. When the lights came on, 4 Catherian students were tied up with their own equipment while the human team stood calmly nearby. Having completed their original mission objectives without breaking stride, Vextar arrived to investigate the commotion. He examined the scene in silence, noting the sophisticated trap systems and the fact that no one had been seriously injured. Despite the obvious conflict, he commanded. Hyunwoo stepped forward as the unofficial leader of the human group. "Training exercise completed successfully, sir. Minor equipment malfunctions experienced by other teams." The trainer's yellow eyes swept over the tied-up Catherians, the evidence of counter-surveillance, and the calm faces of the human students. Everyone in the room knew exactly what had happened, but the humans had been careful not to technically break any academy rules. "Equipment malfunctions," Vextar repeated slowly. "How unfortunate. I trust such malfunctions can be avoided in future exercises." "Yes, sir," Hyunwoo replied. "We'll be sure to help other teams maintain their equipment properly." For the first time since their arrival at the academy, Vextar's expression showed something that might have been approval. Or perhaps it was just indigestion. With aliens, it was often hard to tell. As the other students filed out of the training area, Vextar lingered for a moment, watching the humans clean up their improvised systems. These strange little creatures continued to surprise him in ways that 20 years of training experience had not prepared him for. They were no longer the broken, bleeding recruits who had stumbled through his first demonstration. Something new was emerging from the crucible of academy training, something that did not fit into any of his species' traditional categories. The humans were becoming something dangerous. Vextar stood alone in his private quarters, staring at the holographic display that floated above his desk. Combat statistics, training scores, and psychological evaluations scrolled past in neat columns of data. For 20 years, he had been filing similar reports about academy recruits. This report was different. Every number told the same impossible story. The humans were succeeding where they should have failed. Their physical capabilities remained far below galactic average. but their performance scores climbed steadily week after week. More troubling was their effect on other species. Groups that had trained alongside humans showed improved cooperation and problem-solving abilities. The door chimed, and Vextar's supervisor entered without waiting for permission. Commander Thalex was pure Dracani nobility, with scales that gleamed like polished obsidian and scars that told stories of 100 battles. He moved with the casual confidence of someone who had never met an enemy he could not crush. "Your reports are causing concern among the Academy leadership," Commander Thalex said without preamble. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "Humans achieving top performance scores? Impossible." Vextar gestured to the holographic display. "The data does not lie, Commander. Their improvement curve exceeds every projection." "Then your training methods are flawed?" The commander's tail lashed with irritation. "Humans are weak. This is established fact. They have no natural weapons, no armor, no enhanced capabilities. They should be failing. Perhaps our understanding of weakness requires revision," Vextar said carefully. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Commander Thalex turned his full attention to his subordinate, yellow eyes narrowing with dangerous interest. "Explain." Vextar activated a different display, showing combat footage from the previous week's exercises. "Observe. Here recruit Hyunwoo faces a granite lord in single combat. By all measurements, he should be crushed within seconds." The footage showed the human moving with fluid grace around his massive opponent, striking at weak points with precision while avoiding the alien's devastating attacks. The fight ended with the granite lord on the ground and the human barely breathing hard. "Technique over strength," Vextar continued. "Here, recruit Jin'e leads a mixed-species tactical team through a complex infiltration scenario. Her human intuition for deception allows her to anticipate enemy movements that our advanced sensors missed." More footage showed the small human woman coordinating aliens twice, her size with subtle gestures and whispered commands. The mission succeeded where 3 previous teams had failed. "And here," Vextar said, pulling up the most recent data, "Recruit Su-Min presents a strategic analysis that surpasses work produced by our senior military academies." Commander Thalex studied the information with growing disbelief. The human had identified weaknesses in established Dracani battle doctrine that had gone unnoticed for centuries. Her proposed modifications were elegant, practical, and devastatingly effective. "This is not possible," the commander said finally. "You are suggesting that these primitive creatures could teach us about warfare." "I suggest nothing," Vextar replied. "I merely report what I observe." But privately he was beginning to understand something that disturbed him deeply. The Dracani had built their military philosophy around overwhelming physical superiority. They were stronger, tougher, and more naturally aggressive than almost any species in the galaxy. For millions of years, this approach had worked perfectly. The humans were forcing him to consider alternatives he had never imagined. That afternoon brought another demonstration of human adaptability that shook Vextar's understanding even further. During live-fire combat exercises, recruit Dong Hyun suffered a serious injury when a weapons malfunction sent him crashing into a wall at high speed. Medical scanners showed multiple broken ribs, internal bleeding, and possible spinal damage. Any sensible being would have accepted medical evacuation and spent weeks recovering. Dong Hyun insisted on completing the exercise. "I can still fight," he told the medical team, blood seeping through his uniform. "My legs work, my arms work. That's all I need." The medics were appalled. Vextar found himself equally disturbed, but for different reasons. He had seen Dracani warriors fight through injuries that would kill most species. But this was something else entirely. This was not just physical toughness. It was complete mental refusal to accept defeat. Dong Hyun modified his fighting style on the spot, compensating for his injuries with techniques he invented in real time. He used walls and obstacles to support his damaged body, while maintaining full offensive capability. By the end of the exercise, he had defeated 3 uninjured opponents using pure tactical intelligence. "Why?" Vextar asked him afterward while medical drones worked to repair the damage. "Why continue when stopping would have been logical?" Dong Hyun looked at him with eyes that held no fear, only quiet determination. "Because my team needed me to continue. Because that's what humans do." That evening, Vextar found himself doing something unprecedented. He went to the Academy's archive and began researching human history. What he found there challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare, survival, and the nature of strength itself. Humans were a young species with no natural advantages. Their homeworld was neither the harshest nor the most resource-rich in the galaxy. They had no obvious reason to have developed into effective warriors. Yet their history was filled with examples of impossible victories achieved through pure stubborn refusal to surrender. They had fought wars against overwhelming odds and won through creativity and endurance. They had survived disasters that would have wiped out entire civilizations by adapting faster than conditions could kill them. They had explored dangerous regions of space, not because they were naturally suited for it, but because they were too curious and determined to be stopped by mere impossibility. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to grow stronger under pressure. Other species fought best when they felt safe and confident. Humans fought best when they were desperate and outnumbered. They turned disadvantages into advantages with a consistency that bordered on supernatural. The more Vextar studied, the more he realized that his training methods might be having the opposite effect of what he intended. Every brutal challenge was making the humans more capable, not breaking them down. Every impossible scenario was teaching them new ways to overcome limitations. He was not defeating them. He was forging them into something unprecedented. 2 days later, during advanced combat simulation, Vextar made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of pitting humans against alien opponents designed to highlight their weaknesses, he created a scenario that played to their strengths. The exercise involved a hostage rescue mission in an urban environment filled with civilians. Success required precise coordination, creative problem-solving, and the ability to use minimal force against multiple threats. It was exactly the kind of complex scenario that traditional military doctrine struggled with. The human team excelled beyond every expectation. They moved through the simulated city like they had been born to urban warfare, turning the environment itself into a weapon. They rescued all hostages, neutralized all threats, and achieved every mission objective without a single civilian casualty. More importantly, they did it in ways that the Academy's instructors had never considered. They used psychological warfare, misdirection, and social manipulation alongside traditional combat techniques. They turned the enemy's strengths against them while maximizing their own advantages. When the exercise ended, Vextar realized that he had been looking at the problem backwards. He had been trying to make humans fight like aliens instead of teaching them to fight like humans. That night, he filed a report that he knew would end his career or begin something entirely new. Recommendation for immediate policy revision, he wrote. Human military doctrine should not be corrected to match galactic standards. Instead, galactic military doctrine should be expanded to incorporate human methodologies. He paused, claws hovering over the input device. 20 years of military tradition argued against what he was about to write. But the evidence was undeniable. Additional recommendation: humans should not be trained to overcome their limitations. They should be trained to weaponize them. As he sealed the report and transmitted it to Academy Command, Vextar wondered what kind of warriors these strange little creatures would become if they were properly nurtured, instead of constantly tested for failure. He suspected the galaxy was about to find out. The transport ship shuddered as it entered the atmosphere of Kethmore, the Academy's designated final examination world. Through the small viewports, Hyunwoo could see a landscape that looked like it had been designed by someone who hated all forms of life. Twisted rock formations jutted from poisonous swamps while acid rain fell from a sky the color of infected wounds. 2 weeks, Vextar announced to the assembled recruits. His voice carried over the sound of the ship's struggling engines. Survive 2 weeks on Kethmore while completing your assigned objectives. Teams of 5, mixed species composition. No outside assistance except for medical emergencies that threaten immediate death. Hyunwoo felt his stomach clench. The final examination had a 30% fatality rate even among the Academy's best graduates. For species like humans who were considered physically inferior, the odds were much worse. Your survival gear includes basic environmental suits, emergency rations for 1 week, standard weapons, and communication equipment, the trainer continued. Everything else you must find or create yourselves. The human team had been split up, assigned to different mixed species groups as the Academy required. Hyunwoo found himself teamed with Krek Nor, a massive granite lord whose idea of strategy was to smash through obstacles until they stopped being obstacles. His other teammates were Silence in Deep Water, one of the gentle ones whose species had never developed words for violence, and Thixol, a Catherian technician who considered all other species to be slightly clever animals. It was not an ideal combination for survival in Hell. The dropships deposited each team in different regions of Kethmore's nightmare landscape. Hyunwoo's team landed in what the mission briefing called the Screaming Valleys, a maze of canyons filled with predators, unstable rock formations, and geysers that sprayed superheated acid instead of water. Their first objective was to establish a base camp and maintain it for 48 hours while defending against automated attack drones. Simple enough, except that finding a defensible position in the hellscape proved nearly impossible. Kreknor wanted to dig a cave in the canyon wall using his natural rock-shaping abilities. Thixol insisted they needed high ground for optimal sensor coverage. Silence in Deep Water refused to consider any position that might disturb the local ecosystem, regardless of how hostile that ecosystem was to them. Hyunwoo listened to them argue for 20 minutes while studying the terrain with human eyes trained by months of brutal academy instruction. Finally, he interrupted. "There," he said, pointing to what looked like a completely useless formation of twisted metal and stone about halfway up the canyon wall. "We set up there." "That position offers no tactical advantages," Thixol protested, her mandibles clicking with irritation. "No elevated sight lines, no natural barriers, insufficient space for proper defensive emplacements." "It's perfect," Hyunwoo said simply. Trust me, the next 6 hours proved his point. The position he had chosen was not strategically sound, according to any traditional military doctrine. But it was strategically sound according to human logic, which operated on different principles entirely. The twisted formation provided just enough cover from the attack drones as sensors, while allowing the team to monitor 3 different approach routes. The seemingly useless space was actually perfectly sized for their small group, requiring minimal resources to defend. Most importantly, the position looked so worthless that the automated systems largely ignored it, focusing their attention on more obviously defensive positions. When the attack drones finally located their camp, the human had prepared surprises that no academy instructor had taught him. He had studied the drones' programming during their approach, noting patterns in their search algorithms and attack protocols. By the time they struck, he had turned their own tactical programming against them. The drones expected opponents who would fight like civilized soldiers, using proper weapons and established tactics. Instead, they found traps made from environmental hazards, decoy signals created from salvaged equipment, and a defense strategy that treated the entire canyon as a weapon to be wielded. "Impossible," Thixol muttered as they watched the smoking remains of the last attack drone tumble into the acid pools below. "Those systems were designed by our best military programmers." "That's why they failed," Hyunwoo explained, checking their remaining supplies. "They were designed by programmers who think like programmers. But they were fighting someone who thinks like a human. The second objective required them to traverse 50 kilometers of hostile terrain to reach an extraction point while avoiding or defeating randomly placed combat scenarios. Most teams approached this as a straightforward movement problem, planning routes that minimized exposure to danger zones. Hyunwoo took a different approach. Instead of avoiding the combat scenarios, he studied them during the team's rest periods, identifying patterns in their deployment and activation sequences. By the time they began moving, he had essentially turned the Academy's final examination into a puzzle to be solved rather than an ordeal to be survived. "The combat scenarios are not random," he explained to his confused teammates as they prepared to move out. "They follow a pattern based on optimal training value. If we approach them correctly, they become tools instead of obstacles." What followed was a masterclass in human tactical thinking. Each combat scenario was designed to test specific skills and responses. By engaging them in unexpected ways, Hyunwoo's team gained access to superior equipment, better intel about the terrain ahead, and tactical advantages that were invisible to other approaches. When they encountered a scenario designed to test urban combat skills, instead of fighting their way through the simulated city, they used the human approach of negotiation and misdirection to turn the automated defenders against each other. When they faced a wilderness survival challenge, they used it as an opportunity to resupply and gather intelligence rather than simply enduring it. Silence in deep water, whose species had never understood warfare, found herself fascinated by human approaches that minimized actual violence while maximizing strategic advantage. Your species fights without hatred, she observed. You treat combat as problem-solving rather than dominance display. Because that's what it is, Hyunwoo replied, studying their map for the next day's challenges. Violence is just one tool among many, usually not the best tool. Kreknor, whose people had built their entire culture around displays of strength, was slower to adapt, but eventually began to see the advantages. Small human finds paths that strong beings cannot see, he admitted. Perhaps strength is not always the solution. Even Thixal, despite her species' natural arrogance, could not argue with results. Their team was ahead of schedule, had suffered minimal casualties, and was completing objectives that were designed to be barely achievable. But the real test came on day 12, when everything went wrong at once. Vexstar was observing their progress from an orbital monitoring station when the emergency alerts began flashing across his screens. A massive storm system had developed unexpectedly, generating weather conditions that exceeded the safety parameters for the exercise. Worse, seismic activity had destabilized the region where several teams were operating. The monitoring station's automated systems began calculating evacuation priorities. Teams in immediate danger would be extracted first, followed by those in moderate risk zones. Hyunwoo's team was classified as low priority because their current position appeared relatively safe. The automated systems did not account for human moral flexibility when Hyunwoo's team received the emergency broadcast, warning them to shelter in place until the storm passed. The human was already studying the terrain maps and calculating movement times. Two other teams were in immediate danger zones, and the extraction ships would not reach them before the worst of the storm hit. We have to help them, Hyunwoo said simply. Negative, Thixal replied immediately. Mission parameters clearly state that teams operate independently. Attempting rescue operations would violate Academy protocols. Then we violate protocols. The argument that followed revealed fundamental differences in how species approached survival situations. For most aliens, following established procedures was a survival trait that had kept their civilization stable for millennia. For humans, breaking rules to save lives was an equally fundamental survival trait. Hyunwoo settled the argument by simply starting to move toward the first endangered team. You can stay here if you want. I'm going. In the end, they all went. What followed was 2 days of impossible effort in conditions that should have killed them all. They fought through the storm, navigated collapsing terrain, and reached the first team just as their shelter was failing. The rescue required techniques that no academy instructor had ever taught, improvised from desperation and human stubbornness. But it was during the second rescue that disaster struck. A massive predator, driven from its normal territory by the seismic activity, attacked their group while they were evacuating an injured granite lord. The creature was the size of a building, covered in natural armor that shrugged off their weapons, and possessed of a cunning intelligence that made it far more dangerous than the automated training scenarios. The battle was hopeless from the beginning. Their combined firepower could barely scratch the creature's hide, and it was fast enough to prevent escape. That was when the creature made the mistake of targeting Vexstar. The trainer had been monitoring the rescue operation from a mobile command post, preparing to call for emergency extraction when the storm passed. But the predator's attack had damaged his position, trapping him under collapsed equipment with spinal injuries that left him paralyzed from the waist down. Hyunwoo saw the trainer fall and made a decision that defied every logical calculation. Abandoning the relative safety of their defensive position, he charged directly at the massive predator. "Human, no," Thixal shouted. "You cannot face that creature alone?" But Hyunwoo was not planning to fight the creature. He was planning to save Vexstar, and fighting was just one tool among many. Using techniques learned from months of academy training, enhanced by human creativity and desperation, he turned the rescue into a tactical masterpiece. He used the creature's own size and aggression against it, leading it into unstable terrain where its weight worked against it. He exploited its hunting instincts, making himself appear to be prey, while actually controlling the predator's movements. Most importantly, he used the one advantage that no alien had ever considered: Humans were not just individually stubborn, they were collectively insane. When one human did something impossible, other humans felt obligated to match or exceed that impossibility. While Hyunwoo distracted the predator, his teammates executed a rescue plan that required precise timing, perfect coordination, and complete trust in each other's abilities. Silence in deep water used her species' natural empathy to calm the injured granite lords, while Thicksall rigged explosives from salvaged equipment. Kreknor shaped stone barriers with his natural abilities while calculating structural loads in real time. The plan worked perfectly until it didn't. The predator proved more intelligent than expected, recognizing the trap and turning to attack Vextar directly. For a moment that seemed to last forever, the massive creature loomed over the paralyzed trainer, claws raised to deliver a killing blow. Hyunwoo reached them first. The impact of tackling a creature 10 times his size should have killed the human instantly. Instead, his desperate momentum carried both him and Vextar out of the predator's immediate reach, buying precious seconds for the explosives to detonate. When the dust settled, the predator was dead, buried under tons of carefully collapsed stone. Vextar was alive but barely conscious, his massive form supported by a human who should not have had the strength to move him. "Why?" the trainer whispered as emergency medical drones finally reached them. "Why risk yourself for someone who has spent months trying to break you?" Hyunwoo looked down at the alien who had shattered his nose on the first day of training. Blood was streaming from new injuries and his entire body shook with exhaustion, but his eyes held the same stubborn determination they had shown 6 months ago. "Because that's what humans do," he said simply. "We don't leave anyone behind." The final 3 days of the examination passed in a blur of emergency medical procedures and accelerated extraction operations. When the dust settled and all teams were safely back at the academy, the results were unprecedented. Not only had Hyunwoo's team completed all their objectives ahead of schedule, they had also successfully rescued 2 other teams and saved the life of their observing instructor. Their performance metrics exceeded every previous record in academy history. But more importantly, their methods had been observed and recorded by academy monitoring systems. For the first time, human tactical approaches had been documented under actual combat conditions against real threats. The implications were staggering. If humans could achieve these results while still being trained according to alien methodologies, what could they accomplish if properly nurtured according to their own nature? As Vextar recovered in the Academy Medical Center, his spine repaired by advanced alien surgery, he reflected on the events of Kethmore. The human who had carried him to safety was the same one whose nose he had broken in a casual display of superiority 6 months ago. The reversal of roles was complete. The trainer who had once demonstrated human weakness now owed his life to human strength. But it was not the kind of strength that could be measured in muscle mass or bone density. It was the strength to do what was necessary regardless of the personal cost. The strength to adapt and overcome any obstacle. The strength to turn weakness itself into a weapon. The graduation ceremony was still 2 days away, but Vextar already knew what his final evaluation would say. These humans had not just survived the Academy's training, they had transformed it into something entirely new. The galaxy was about to learn what humans were truly capable of, when they were no longer fighting to prove they belonged, but fighting because they knew they belonged. The Academy's Great Hall had been transformed for the graduation ceremony. Banners representing 17 different worlds hung from the vaulted ceiling, while dignitaries from across the galaxy filled the viewing galleries. Representatives from the Galactic Council, military commanders from every major species, and Academy alumni who had achieved legendary status all gathered to witness the culmination of 6 months of brutal training. Hyunwoo stood at attention in the front row of graduates, his dress uniform bearing ribbons that told the story of his transformation. The medical reconstruction of his nose had healed perfectly, leaving no trace of that first day's humiliation. But the changes that really mattered could not be seen in mirrors. Beside him stood Jinhae, Donghyun, and Sumin. The 4 humans who had entered the academy as curiosities and underdogs now wore the insignia of the top graduating class. Their presence in the front rank had caused considerable discussion among the assembled dignitaries. "Never in the Academy's 300-year history," announced Commandant Veltar, "a ancient Dracani whose scales had turned silver with age, have we witnessed such a dramatic demonstration of potential realized through proper training." The commandant's words carried special weight. His species did not give praise lightly, and his approval could launch military careers or doom them to obscurity. For him to personally preside over a human graduation was unprecedented. This class has achieved remarkable results across all evaluation categories, the commandant continued. But 4 individuals have exceeded every previous performance standard in ways that require us to reconsider our understanding of military excellence. Vextar watched from the instructor's section, his spine fully healed but his perspective permanently altered. The trainer who had once dismissed humans as physically inferior now wore the expression of someone who had witnessed something that challenged fundamental assumptions about strength and capability. The first award went to Sumin for tactical innovation. Her final project had been a complete revision of academy training protocols that incorporated human approaches to problem solving. Military analysts from across the galaxy were already studying her work, recognizing its potential to revolutionize strategic thinking. Recruit. Sumin has demonstrated that superior firepower and advanced technology are no substitute for creative intelligence and adaptive thinking, the commandant announced. Her methodologies will be integrated into academy curriculum effective immediately. The second award recognized Jin'e's achievements in multi-species cooperation and leadership. Her ability to coordinate teams of diverse aliens had proven invaluable during complex training scenarios, and her techniques were already being studied by diplomatic corps throughout the galaxy. Recruit Jin'e has shown that true leadership transcends species barriers, the commandant said. Her approaches to team coordination will reshape how we train mixed-species units. Donghyun received recognition for equipment innovation and field adaptation. His modifications to Standard Academy, weapons and survival gear had been so effective that they were being manufactured for distribution to regular military units. Recruit Donghyun has proven that improvisation and creative engineering can overcome limitations that seem insurmountable, the commandant explained. His designs are already saving lives in active combat zones. Finally, the moment that everyone had been waiting for arrived. The Academy's highest honor, the award for overall excellence, was traditionally given to the graduate who best exemplified the qualities of an ideal military officer. This year's recipient has demonstrated something that our evaluation systems were not designed to measure, the commandant said, his voice carrying across the silent hall. He has shown that the greatest strength is not the ability to dominate others, but the ability to sacrifice for them. Not the power to destroy enemies, but the wisdom to create allies. Hyunwoo felt his heart racing as the commandant's gaze settled on him. 6 months ago, he had been a broken, bleeding recruit whose only achievement was refusing to quit. Now he stood ready to receive the Academy's highest honor. Recruit Hyunwoo stepped forward. The walk to the podium felt like crossing a vast distance through hostile territory. Every eye in the hall was focused on the human who had somehow transformed from joke to inspiration. In the viewing galleries, he could see representatives from species that had never considered humans worth their attention. 6 months ago, the commandant said as Hyunwoo reached the podium, Trainer Vexitar demonstrated the supposed weakness of the human species by breaking this recruit's nose with a casual blow. Today, that same recruit stands before us having carried that trainer's unconscious form to safety across 50 kilometers of hostile terrain. The symbolism was not lost on anyone present. The reversal of roles represented more than personal growth. It represented a fundamental shift in galactic understanding of what constituted true military strength. But the real demonstration of this recruit's character is not that he saved his instructor's life, the commandant continued. It is that he never once showed resentment for the treatment he received. He understood that harsh training was not punishment but preparation. He transformed every obstacle into an opportunity to grow stronger. Vextar rose from his seat in the instructor's section. His movement was slow and deliberate, still accommodating his recently healed spine. The massive Dracani made his way to the podium where his former student waited. In my 20 years as an academy instructor, Vextar said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustic systems, I have trained warriors from every major species in the galaxy. I have seen the strong become stronger, and the weak fall by the wayside. I believed I understood the nature of military excellence. He paused, his yellow eyes fixing on Hyunwoo with an expression that held both respect and something approaching reverence. These humans taught me that I understood nothing. They showed me that true strength is not the absence of weakness but the refusal to be defined by it. They demonstrated that the greatest warriors are not those who cannot be broken, but those who rebuild themselves stronger each time they fall. The hall was completely silent as Vextar extended his hand to Hyunwoo, but this time it was not the casual gesture of superior to inferior that had preceded the broken nose. This was the respectful handshake of one warrior acknowledging another as an equal. "I am honored," Vextar said formally, "to present this award to someone who taught me what I should have been teaching him." As Hyunwoo accepted the award, he felt the weight of more than just the ceremonial medal. He was carrying the hopes and expectations of his entire species. Every human in the galaxy would be judged by what he and his classmates accomplished from this day forward. "Thank you, sir," he said simply, "for everything." The ceremony continued with the formal commissioning of all graduates, but the real story was being written in the conversations taking place throughout the hall. Military commanders were already discussing recruitment initiatives targeting human worlds. Diplomatic representatives were calculating the strategic implications of an alliance with a species that specialized in impossible victories. Most significantly, academy instructors were quietly questioning training methodologies that had remained unchanged for centuries. If humans could achieve such results while being trained according to alien standards, what could other species accomplish if training were adapted to their unique strengths rather than forcing conformity to established norms? After the formal ceremony concluded, Vextar found Hyunwoo in the Academy's memorial garden, a quiet space dedicated to graduates who had died in service to the galaxy. The human was standing before a wall carved with thousands of names, contemplating the price that military excellence demanded. "Second thoughts?" the trainer asked. "Just thinking about responsibility," Hyunwoo replied. "Every human who comes to the Academy after us will be compared to what we accomplished here. That's a lot of pressure." "Then you still do not understand what you have achieved?" Vexatar settled onto a bench designed for his species' larger frame. "You did not succeed despite being human. You succeeded because you are human. The Academy did not make you into something alien. It revealed what you already were." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, trainer and student reflecting on a journey that had transformed them both. Finally, Vextar spoke again. "I filed my final report this morning," he said. "I recommended that the Academy establish a new training track specifically designed for human psychology and capabilities. You will not be the last of your species to pass through these halls." "What did you tell them about us?" "The truth, that humans are not physically superior to other species, but that physical superiority is irrelevant when facing an enemy that refuses to acknowledge defeat. That you compensate for every weakness with 3 different strengths. That you treat impossible odds as interesting challenges rather than insurmountable obstacles." Vextar turned to look directly at his former student. "Most importantly, I told them that any military force wise enough to include humans in its ranks gains an advantage that cannot be quantified or replicated. You do not just fight for victory. You fight for each other. That makes you more dangerous than any weapon we have ever devised." As the sun set over the Academy grounds, painting the alien sky in shades of purple and gold, Hyunwoo reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. 6 months ago, he had volunteered for a demonstration that he thought would prove human courage. Instead, it had begun a transformation that revealed human nature itself. The trainer who had shattered his nose on day 1 had taught him more than combat techniques or survival skills. Vextar had shown him that strength was not about never falling down. It was about getting back up every time, stronger and wiser than before. Now, as newly commissioned officers in the galactic military, the human graduates would carry that lesson to the stars. They would face challenges that their training could not have prepared them for, fight enemies that their instructors had never imagined, and find solutions that established doctrine did not provide. But they would do it as humans. Not as pale imitations of alien warriors, but as representatives of a species that had earned its place among the stars through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The galaxy was about to discover what humans were truly capable of when they stopped trying to prove they belonged and started showing why they were needed. The trainer had shattered a human's nose on day 1. By graduation, that human carried the trainer's spine not as a burden, but as a bridge between 2 species learning to respect each other's strength. And that, Hyunwoo realized as he walked back toward his new assignment, was only the beginning.